We are Rogue Media Sports.
It's one thing falling in love with a house, picturing yourself moving in and calling it home, and quite another navigating the world of price negotiating, mortgage lenders, and finding the budget that works best for you. An agent who's a Realtor can make understanding that world easier. Realtors have the expertise, access to proprietary data, and tools to help you get from imagining living somewhere to actually doing it. That's the kind of help we can provide. Because that's who we are. Realtors are members of the National Association of Realtors.
You haven't heard about the McCrispy yet? Well, then, you probably haven't heard the sweet silence after the first crispy bite either. Go try it for yourself to hear the best nut sound you've ever heard.
And it is another edition of the Doomsday podcast. One half of the Doomsday podcast has somehow ended up in Italy, coming to you on the morning after this game. It is 5 o'clock in the afternoon for me in Rome. Last night, Ed Werder, of course, at the studio, at the Frito Nation Studios, there in far north Dallas, in Addison, at our studios. And Ed, always strange. You've traveled with me for years and been around me. You know how strange these things can be. But I did end up, last night I was in Florence, took a little trip, kind of a strange time of the year to do it, but I did it. And so I was up. This game started for me at 2:30 in the morning. And after some great effort, I was able to, with the help of, you can imagine, you know, the people I assemble in my life. I have a buddy from AT&T who was on the phone with me. It was 2:30 my time. He was trying to enjoy the game, and he was trying to walk me through how to get connected from Florence, from a VRBO where we were staying. And anyway, I got to see it. And so I have now, Ed, cut short to be with you and Frito today. I cut short. I did get to see the Sistine Chapel. I'd seen it before, but so awesome to be back and see that, be at the Vatican. And did not, before I got into the St. Peter's Basilica there, I did cut out to make the trip across town and get back to the hotel so we could record the Doomsday podcast. And Ed, I have to say, now, by the way, Ed, have you made the trip over to Italy? I mean, you're a man who's traveled extensively. Have you been able to make this trip?
I have not. I have only been to London in terms of being on another continent, and that was as part of one of the Cowboys American Bowl brigades. And so, no, I never have. And I'm a little disappointed that you didn't make your way to Vatican City, where I would think the Pope would have God's team on the local television there, and you could have sat there and maybe thrown a few back with the Pope and watched the game. And certainly the Cowboys saw the end of their world flash before their eyes several times last night in that game. Defeating the Raiders, as I said, by the narrowest of margins, the width of Gene Sterator's double-folded index card, and the fractional distance between Derek Carr's outstretched arm holding the ball and the end zone pylon. It was that close to doomsday for the Dallas Cowboys at Oakland in the black hole last night. And just amazing that the Cowboys, playing an opponent that really has very little, potential to make the postseason themselves, they need 3 penalties that negated Raiders touchdowns, a missed field goal, a fake punt, and the boldest fourth down gamble of conservative head coach Jason Garrett's coaching career to push the Raiders aside by the slim margin.
I'm so with you, and it was almost Belichickian. Only Belichick can sort of get away with that, doing that in his own territory. And to your point, by the way, about Vatican City, I want you to know I asked about how things were going for Pope Benedict. He just turned 90, and he's the first pope ever, I believe, to go ahead and just kind of retire and go, well, I'm getting too old for this. And he lives at Vatican City on the separate side of the property, and they try to keep the two apart. They try to keep the new pope away from Benedict because they don't care for each other too much, apparently. So I thought you would like that.
It's kind of like a Jimmy Jerry situation.
Yes. And the beautiful palace that is where the Pope usually stays, this Pope, Pope Ferdinand done a good job. He's a nice guy. Seems like a good pope. I've enjoyed him. He's from Argentina, I believe. And this pope has decided, you know what? This is too much. There's too much material wealth involved with the place, so I'm going to stay in the dormitory. So he's just over in the dormitory. He's got other folks walking around.
Those are good optics, and that's not what the NFL had yesterday. As we saw, two of the highest profile games, the Cowboys Raiders and the game between the Steelers and the Patriots, be affected in the final seconds by the two most controversial rules in the NFL today: the catch rule and the fumble into the end zone is a touchback rule. Yes. And then on top of that, we have Gene Sterators pulling an index card out of his pocket from where they usually make notes on penalties and, if there's an ejection, they note it, and using that to determine whether a 4th and 1 gamble by Jason Garrett in a no-back set in which Dak Prescott lurches forward, did he get the first down on his own 40-yard line? Or did Jason Garrett just pull a Barry Switzer? That's what was being determined by the width of that index card. And I talked to two people in the NFL who are former officials and asked if this is part of the protocol. Is this what these guys are taught to do if it's that close? And both of them said no, that it was an old-school move. Jerry Markbright would be proud. They'd both seen it done before by some old-timers, but mostly they defined it as a smart ad lib by Gene Steratore, who did have a bit of a smirk on his face after. Oh,
I know. There's so much to get into. Yes, so, I thought that was great. And the smirk, I want to get into that with you. I think he has some sort of vaudeville characteristics to him. This Gene Steratore, and we'll address that. Hey, I do want to say. And I think it's very appropriate, but I couldn't make it across the overseas this trip with my Q5.
You couldn't ferry it over. You couldn't ferry it over.
I wasn't able to carry. I wasn't able to ferry it over. What a
I'm
gorgeous
sure Doomsday
vehicle.
would pick up the check on that.
The Audi Q5, D&M Leasing, extending the sale through the end of the year, and that means you still have some time to get a great deal on a new car for Christmas or the new year. With D&M's lease, you can get a great Christmas gift and not make a payment until February. You'll also save up to 50% a month versus buying and have no early termination fees. Here's how you make it happen. Call D&M Leasing today at any local area code and 35 lease. It's 35 LEASE, or visit dmautoleasing.com. Again, call them today. Any local area code and 35 lease. 35 LEASE, or visit dmautoleasing.com. You can do it anywhere in Texas. Hey, we'll find a way. If you're outside Texas listening to us, we'll find a way to get you a vehicle. Waco right now, because of my Waco audience, one of the largest areas for D&M leasing vehicles. The call's free. Not calling will cost you thousands. Frito, if you would,
cue the band.
Please play the music.
So the Cowboys now 8-6, need to win out against Seattle and Philadelphia, and then they have to leapfrog the Seahawks, the Lions, and the Falcons to claim the final NFC playoff spot, and they get a significant boost in their prospects today. Dim though they are, Ezekiel Elliott, back from 38 days in exile, back and cutting the finest of figures. This incredible finely tuned and chiseled physique. You speak of the marble statues that you have seen on this tour over there in Italy. You should marvel at the abs of one Ezekiel Elliott, 4th pick in the draft and centerpiece of the entire Cowboys franchise, back at the Star. We'll talk more about that and the significance of that in a moment. Matt Mosley still on vacation or exile, whichever the case may be. Maybe there's a fatwa out on him. I don't know. I'll check with Larry David. But I am in Frito Nation's studios in North Dallas. And, Mose, I thought, to make a final point about what we saw last night and Gene Steratore using that index card pulled from his pocket to help him determine whether the Cowboys succeeded on a 4th and 1 gamble from their own 39-yard line. the NFL clearly does not like the optics of a billion-dollar business using sticks, chains, and often arbitrary ball placement, now adding white paper index cards to the process of making huge decisions on winning and losing and teams making the playoffs or not. Because as you know, when the media covers these games, we have access to the players and the coaches, and of course in the Cowboys situation, the owner after every game. They usually do not provide access to the officials unless they use the designated media member, pool reporter, to ask the officials about a hugely unique or significant call in a game. And so we did have that last night, and it was interesting to me that Steratore went out of his way multiple times to suggest that he visually made the decision, as he has always done, when he stretched out the chain and examined the links and whether the football reached the chain, the pole, or didn't, and that the index card was just reaffirming that decision. The NFL clearly does not want the index card to be the overwhelming, enduring memory of this game.
I have to say, and I have, even over here from Italy, a lot of folks are reading all your tweets, Ed, and reacting to that. And I do love that. There are a couple things. I was reading yours today, and then Sam Farmer's in the moments sort of after all that happened last night, our friend from the Los Angeles Times. And I think it's important to remind everybody, well, I think all Cowboys fans, everybody listening to this, realizes Gene Steratore is infamous. I mean, he is the Bennett Salvatore. That was the one who made the infamous calls against the Dallas Mavericks 2006 finals. He's basically the equivalent of that in the NFL, because he was the one in the catch or non-catch against the Packers. Was that 2014 with Dez, who was on the scene for that. And so some people are even saying, was this some sort of makeup call? And Ed, one thing Sam tweeted last night that was kind of funny to me was a lot of people are saying, why don't you just use a laser? But why do they still bring these chains out? It's so archaic. It's kind of silly with everything that they have. And what Sam was saying, the NFL's always said they think fans, they love the drama of bringing the measurement out because it sort of builds the anticipation. And I think what Gene Steratore, as you said, he brought up sort of I guess this was sort of an old school move. But, and he said, hey, it was just kind of reaffirming. I did it visually. But, I mean, this was almost a made-for-TV. I mean, this was one of those engrossing, and for a product this year that has been much maligned, this was pretty exciting just to watch. And I think it was so surreal to sort of see this play out. It was already kind of a wild game, and then all of a sudden you see the index card come out. So I was fascinated, and to your point about the smirk, Ed, and somebody pointed this out. I've always I looked this up years ago because Gene Steratore reminded me of somebody. I'm like, this looks like somebody that I've seen in the past, like an old comedian or something. And the comedian that I'm talking about is Sid Caesar, who was a very, very famous old comedian. And Sid Caesar. It was kind of a vaudevillian a vaudeville actor / comedian. Sid Caesar was actually a great writer back in the day, a comedy writer. And so anyway, when Steratore had that little smirk or smile while doing it, it just to me, it became just a big show. And you know what? I think in the sense, some people say, it's bad for the NFL. I think anytime the NFL has something incredibly compelling happen, that's not some player doing something
or some owner in a certain southern city. I mean, it's going to deflect a lot of that, right? Jerry Richardson has apparently settled 4 sexual harassment claims against him, and the team was initially going to investigate that. Then the league intervened and said, no, we'll handle this, with all these players obviously watching to see, you investigate Ezekiel Elliott for a year, but you're going to let an owner have his own team investigate his conduct. And so obviously there have been several settlements of accusations, and now all of a sudden, once the league announced that they were going to handle the investigation, Jerry Richardson quickly announces he's selling the franchise, and the only person to express some angst about this, of course, is Jerry Jones. Because Jerry doesn't really care about being on the right side of public opinion very often.
That was the big. I jumped on some of the sites today, and that was the big headline: Jerry laments or say sad for Jerry Richardson. It's like I don't know if today's the day to be expressing, I feel bad for old Jerry, because I mean, Ed, if you read that SI story, Wortham or Wertheim did that story. I can't remember who else. It was a double byline. Yeah, double byline story. And, at first you do kind of think, okay, is this an 81-year-old, just kind of dirty old man type deal? And then it got really creepy, some things about, hey, do you mind if I shave your legs or something? I mean, okay, it's like Jerry is out. Next thing you know, it's kind of like.
Was he using a Harry's razor? I mean, we should throw Harry's in there. They've been one of our great sponsors.
Harry's is coming back to us.
Let me razor your legs with this Harry's razor that Matt Mosley just sent me for Christmas.
I don't know if Harry's Razors really wants to be involved in any sort of accusations.
Well,
with,
it's free.
Jerry Richardson, quite honestly. But I will say this: you and Frito, I'm so excited to see you after Christmas, because I have a huge box for you, and it does include Harry's razors, and so I'm excited about that. You'll be able to get the gifts.
We've talked about Jerry, and he's concerned about his good friend and ownership. But what Jerry's most excited about right now, and it was obvious after the game last night, is that the Cowboys succeeded ultimately in achieving their goal, as poorly as they played at oftentimes last night and throughout this 6-game suspension of Zeke Elliott, that they've got their guy back. And Jerry said, we need him back. It's good to have him back. I think Zeke is going to energize our whole team. And so they achieved their goal of having meaningful football left as their best player returns to the team, apparently in fantastic shape, which, as you remember, Stephen Jones talked to us here on the Doomsday podcast as our guest last week and said, hey, this guy said when he left he was going to recommit himself to football, to being one of the great players in the league, something that is attainable for him, and that he's been playing a little heavy, and vowed that he would come back at a lower weight. And I would say that the Cowboys were shockingly ineffective, going 0-3 in those first 3 games without Elliott. And even Steven said, hey, we've got to put together a better roster going forward. We've got to be able to withstand the loss of him or a Sean Lee or a Tyron Smith, which, oh, by the way, they may be dealing with that loss this very next week against Seattle.
Yeah.
But I think the thing that we saw throughout this period of time without Ezekiel Elliott in the lineup, and was pretty obvious again last night, is that the Cowboys just cannot consistently win in Dak's evolution as an NFL quarterback right now throwing the football. I mean, the Raiders' defense among the worst in the league, and yet they were able to create pressure and sacks. They created 2 interceptions of Dak Prescott, who's had, 4 multi-interception games this year, had only 1 as a rookie.
Yeah.
And they were able to shut out both Des Bryant and Cole Beasley until the final 3 minutes of the third quarter. So, as Des said last night, hey, everything changes now. Elliott flips the field in their favor. He said, how will this affect the way teams defend you? And Des said, hey, double me all you want. He's going to rush for 350. And based on what Todd Gurley did in the first half last night against the Seattle Seahawks and their once vaunted Legion of Boom, which no longer exists, that could actually happen, it seems.
And Ed, I have to say, I was looking at some of those photos, and, this is Milan and some of these places over here in Italy where you're on the runway. I sense that, did you not think that, and I guess Ian Rappaport had one of those reports, or he had secured one of those pictures, and then I saw another one. Did that almost seem like a modeling type scene? Like they had brought in a professional photographer to to sort of take some special shots of Zeke. I mean, that was an interesting presentation of here's Zeke. And
I think he's commissioned and is going to produce a documentary, right, on Ezekiel Elliott, my time in exile while my team season went down the drain. I don't know what we should work on some titles, prospective titles for this. But
I wish I was trying to get. I wish I could have reached you last night. I guess I could have just texted you, but it just seemed, because it was the middle of the night for me, and you know how I'm kind of think everything's about me, and so I just kept in my mind. I felt like everybody should be asleep or whatever. But I really felt like we could have helped the Morning News, our old employer, with headlines. Didn't you feel like that index card lent itself to some really fun headlines?
They came up with paper thin win, which was pretty good.
Not bad. I had
Raiders
that
get
one.
carded was a good one I saw somewhere.
Okay. Well, that's okay. There was some.
But it's not like the New York Tabs. I mean, they're not that clever.
No. They would have gone. There's a lot they would have gone with and everything. But boy, your point about Zeke coming back, I thought there were a couple of good tweets that went out right after the game last night. It's kind of like a picture of Zeke kind of holding up his hand to Dak, saying, "I got this." Like, okay, you did well. You hung in there. I know you struggled a little bit, but I'm back. And Ed, how funny is it that he's used this time apparently to get in this incredible physical shape. He's only going to get 2 games in this shape. Now, hopefully, I guess he'll build on this and maybe beat this slender guy next year. But he's going to get 2 games. So, I mean, the way they're building this thing up, if he doesn't get 200 yards per game, it'll feel like some sort of letdown, especially what you said about Gurley. But it is fascinating. And I think, as poorly as Dak played at times, and now one of those interceptions he did get, the ball got tipped. And then one of them was just an extremely poor throw. Now, did Dez make a decision to break off that route?
Yes.
He did. But, I mean, I watched that thing several times, Ed. He was going to get, his career could have ended. Like the timing of it is at 53, the linebacker. Was that Navarro Bowman? Yeah.
He was very aware of Navarro Bowman's presence on that throw. It was a poor throw.
So,
it was not a perfect throw. But I'll just say,
he led him into traffic.
He hesitated. He put one hand up as if to make the barest minimal effort to catch the football or to do his job, for which he paid $13 million. I'm just going to say that if Michael Irvin ever did that to Troy Aikman, they would have had a loud discussion on the field in front of the cameras about that kind of effort leading to the quarterback being intercepted. I don't think Michael Irvin would have made the same play that Dez Bryant did. And I mean, that was pretty pathetic. But they did actually get together on that 40-yard pass play late that set up the winning field goal. I thought the other interesting thing, and I guess Zeke's return will prevent this from being an issue going forward unless he's injured. But their odd use of their running backs last night. Obviously, they continued to start the veteran Alfred Morris as they've done in Zeke's absence, but he was really effective early on. I mean, 51 yards rushing in the first 10 minutes, and all of a sudden, Rod Smith takes over, and he's the back for the rest of the game, except when they're in that goal line situation that's determining the outcome of the game in the fourth quarter, and logically, you would have Smith in there because he's the power back and he scored a rushing touchdown in 5 straight games. But no, they have Alfred Morris in the game. So Zeke's return will alleviate them of all of this sort of decision-making on personnel because Zeke just stays on the field and plays in every situation. But I think the other thing we should discuss is Jason Garrett.
Ed, by the way, think about how long it's been since they've ever had to, with Murray and then Zeke. You raise a good point. I think they literally don't understand how to what to do with 2 backs, and so the fact that they never took Murray off the field for a couple of years there, and then they never take Zeke off the field, I think they have a strange feel for how to work a back. And I'm with you. It's like don't screw with something that's working. If a guy has 51 yards to have, and he's breaking 12 and 16-yard runs and looking really good, why would you ever think about taking him out of a rhythm.
This is my supposition, but my sense of it, or my takeaway, is that they had a plan going into the game, and by God, they were going to stick with the plan. And the plan was, we are going to honor our commitment to Alfred Morris and continue to allow him to be the starter because he's done nothing to forfeit that position. But what we really want to do in the course of this game is we want to get a sense of what Rod Smith can do with more carries and a bigger role. And so let's have him be involved so we can evaluate next year whether we need another running back or not. And, oh, by the way, my answer on that is yes, please, get another running back. One much more like Zeke Elliott, should he ever decide on one of these in-season vacations, as you've taken. So you really can't criticize the man for this because you've done much the same yourself. Yours just wasn't forced.
Yes, I was not. It was not imposed on me, as far as you know. But, that was I'm fascinated to see what kind of Zeke Elliott returns. Now, Ed, take me through. You have been highly critical, and I'm not. There have been times I have been the same, so I don't want to act like put this all on you. But you covered Jason actually as a player back in the day, and then you've watched him as a head coach. And I would say you've been as critical as anybody of his work, and I think that's fair for some of it. I thought it was. I thought what we saw last night was fascinating in the sense that a coach went against character. And he literally coached like someone who, first of all, knew that he couldn't. The only chance his team had was to completely get out of his comfort zone. But, at least for me, I got to give him credit for that. I got to give him credit for at least sort of knowing what he was working with in a sense.
Well, yeah, I mean, he's one of the most, or viewed as one of the most conservative coaches in all of football, but they did put up the graphic last night as they were preparing to go for it on 4th and 1 from their own 39-yard line, even though Tyron Smith was out of the game. And they didn't have a back, which was an odd thing because now it's going to be a Dak Prescott sneak. There's not even the illusion of a back getting the ball in this situation. But they did get it, and it was close. But that was, that and the fake punt, which I guess Jones has the authority to do that on his own in certain circumstances. And so that was sort of an impromptu play, and the decision was left to the punter himself. But ultimately, had it failed, it would have been, Jason Garrett, who would have been viewed as culpable and been answering a lot of very difficult questions. But just the fact that you're going for it in a tie game, that you have to win on the road to get to have any remaining playoff hope, and you're going for it from your own 39-yard line. Your left tackle's out of the game. Your backfield's empty. You got a second-year, quarterback. Now, they've succeeded on a high percentage of plays in those short yardage 3rd and 4th and 1 situations. Best in the league, I believe, was the graphic. But I have to imagine that an awful lot of those came with Zeke Elliott carrying the football and not in the circumstances that they faced last night. So, credit to Jason Garrett. I mean, they had a reverse. They did all kinds of things that are outside the norm for a Jason Garrett team, and it appeared, based on the final result, that they needed every one of those from their risk-averse coach to pull off that game.
Yeah, and I just wonder how the team responds to this. As now Zeke's coming back, but I sort of think when a coach like that does something and rolls dice, but it's like anything. If one of those things doesn't work, if the whole Sterator situation goes the opposite way, and obviously the Oakland Raiders very upset about how that whole thing went down. We're talking about a guy, we're holding it against him that he went against character. Hey, this guy wasn't who he is. I mean, that's sort of how this league is sometimes. It's like you get on a guy if he starts acting like somebody he's not, but then, of course, when it works, it's like, oh, man, gutsy move.
I'm going to give him credit because at the time I thought it was a bad gamble myself.
You did.
I did. I thought it was a bad gamble because there's a very good chance you're not making that, and we saw by how much they did succeed in that situation. And if you don't make it, you're giving the Raiders the ball on your 39-yard line, and your defense has not really proven capable of stopping anybody during the course of the season. And so I did think it was incredibly risky and not something many coaches would have done.
For it to work, I think it almost, you either have to be a coach so desperate that you're about to lose your job, or be like Belichick and have so much credibility. Or even when
boy, Jason loves when you
powers.
compare him to Bill Belichick. He loves that. I never thought I'd hear that.
I'm not comparing him to him. I'm saying generally, you remember that one time he did it was against the Colts.
Yeah.
I mean, he received some criticism. It didn't work. But, because it's Bill Belichick, everybody's like, well, he's had enough success so he can get away with that. Garrett, by the way, our guy, our man from the Ringer now, who has been a scout in the league for a long time, our man Mike, I sort of think he's, Mike Lombardi, I sort of think that he's planted a seed with a lot of people about this whole Jason Garrett the Clapper. Not that we didn't joke about that in the past, but did you notice that during one of those really negative moments last night that NBC just like completely stayed on Jason and really focused on his clapping? I feel like that's kind of catching on a little bit.
Mike Lombardi's a former general manager and league executive with multiple teams who is not a fan of Jason Garrett's and mocks him as being the clapper, as you say, in a way that suggests that that's really all he contributes during the course of a game from the sideline.
Yes.
He just applauds his players and tries to reassure them all the time with his constant applause.
It seems like they always catch him doing it right after like a horrible thing happens. And while that may be a very motivational or nice thing to do, I think it does drive Cowboys fans nuts. Now, Ed, I did want to get your take as far as now. And by the way, I may have to we may have to cut this one off a little early because my international rates, I don't know if I properly handled this. This thing could really jump up there on me. I think this show has already cost me somewhere in the neighborhood of about $2,000-$3,000 on this call. But and by the way, PayPal, you guys be
I was going to say, does that factor in the fees that you pay? Frito and I don't think it does.
I was cutting off that line because I knew it was coming. I think on the defensive side of the ball, boy, I thought there would have been some real goats, and I think Anthony Brown, who dropped a sure interception that would have ended the ball game
again.
We've seen it happen before, and did happen again last night. And then Jordan Lewis, who just got so turned around, and man, on a deep ball in that situation on a 4th and 10, felt the need to just put his arms around the waist of Crabtree, and just a really, really poor play by him on Jordan Lewis to get that 55-yard. That was the longest one this season. That's the longest pass interference this season at just a time when it just couldn't happen.
4th and 10. It was 4th
Raiders,
and 10 for the Raiders.
Yes.
Game's over if that doesn't occur and they don't complete the ball.
So you just put them in a situation where they have to really, really screw things up not to get that game to overtime. And that's why I would say I think those two might want to take Jeff Heath to dinner. Do you think that would be appropriate to maybe do something nice for Jeff Heath?
Has to be the defensive, play of the year. And I'm a guy who has, certainly been skeptical of whether Jeff Heath is a good enough player to be in your secondary if you're a playoff type of team or a Super Bowl contender, because early in his career he seemed like a guy who was just always around a lot of touchdown passes. And but he certainly made a huge play. It took a great angle. Not sure I've ever seen greater acceleration out of him than we saw on that play where, he winds up hitting Derek Carr, and Carr trying to extend the ball to the pylon before he hits the ground out of bounds, loses control of it, and it goes out of the end zone for a touchback and assures the Cowboys victory. It's interesting to me that now in the past 7 days we have seen 3 high high-profile quarterbacks in the NFL, two of them Super Bowl winners, Ben Roethlisberger and Drew Brees, and now Carr, where in each of these situations they had a free play, near the goal line to win a game, knowing that if that play failed, their teams could easily kick a field goal to tie and send a game to overtime unless they did something spectacularly foolish. And that's exactly what all three of them did. Brees and Roethlisberger threw interceptions, and then obviously Carr lost the ball through the end zone for a touchback last night. All three of their teams wound up losing the games. But, that just tells you how close it is in the modern NFL between the teams that succeed and those that fail, those that win, those that lose, those that, are playing golf in a couple of weeks, and those that are vying for the Super Bowl.
Yeah, and Ed, that play, some people, hate that rule. If you lose it like that, if the ball comes free, they hate that one. And then obviously the whole catch rule came up. And
they hate the touchback rule
Patriots.
because obviously that part of the field has always been sacred territory in the NFL, right? And it's treated unlike any other part of the field from the standpoint of if that fumble happens anywhere else, if the ball goes out on the 1 yard line, then the Raiders get the ball on the 1 yard line. If it happens at midfield and the ball goes out at midfield, the Raiders get the ball at midfield. Only in that situation is the team punished to excess by losing the football and giving the opponent the ball on the 20-yard line. It just seems like such an egregious penalty and is so excessive. And I think a lot of people just don't think that's right. That is the rule, and everybody knows the rule, and we've all seen how these players are so reckless, trying to get the ball to the pylon because they want to. It's hero football, and that's what happened. And oftentimes it hurts, and in this case, it cost the Raiders a game. Derek Carr trying to do everything he could to score on that play.
And Ed, I looked at the exact time on the clock. Shockingly, since it was getting right down there to the end of the game, 40 seconds. The minute he was getting hit by Heath, 40 seconds left on the clock. Let's say, it really didn't matter because they had a chance to stop the clock still. But if he gets knocked out of bounds, they're down there on like the 1 or 2 yard line with a fresh set of downs and 40 seconds left to go ahead and win that game, or like you say, at worst, tie it. And you say hero football. It's a great thing to say because in a sense, it's kind of like I'm going to put my body on the line. I'm going to make this heroic play, but in doing so, you just undermine everything because it was such a. And the thing is, it's like you say, it's still such a natural instinct for running backs, receivers, quarterbacks to do that, even though we've seen it work so horribly against teams. To me, Ed, and maybe you can't maybe you can't sort of like coach your team to stop doing that. But I would spend like time in training camp or time constantly talking about that. Guys, it's too precious to reach out there and take a chance on that ball ended up in a touchback.
Yeah, if I was a coach, and I never will be, obviously, but I would certainly teach my players not to do that kind of thing. And we've seen who was it that Jason Garrett used to be so incensed with all the time about them sticking the ball out in piles like that in the middle of the field around the goal line and getting it knocked out. Was it Joseph Randall? I think it was Joseph Randall. Obviously, he became upset with him for much more serious things like stealing underwear and cologne. But yeah, that was a strange thing, and I think it's just too risky. It's just too risky. That was a third down play by Carr, but he had gotten the ball down. He could have gotten the ball down to a first down before the fumble and had a chance to win the game, but instead, it turns out spectacularly bad.
Yeah, and the one thing I think Cowboys fans might be worried about, or maybe I'm just worried about it. Thinking about how Jerry is going to handle all this. If the Cowboys, Ed, get to 10-6 and don't make the playoffs, the optimist in Jerry in my mind, especially after just all the adversity and crazy, some of which he brought in himself with this public battle with her and just all the stuff of dealing and the things that Jerry's been involved with. I think the optimist in Jerry is going to see 10-6 after what happened with Zeke as we're a 13 team. And I would be worried that, and again, I'm getting ahead of things because maybe, who knows, maybe the chances will increase, and with 10-6, they'll sneak into the playoffs and have a shot at this thing. But I sort of sense that with Zeke missing 6 games, that, and I've seen Jerry do this before, that he's not going to make any sort of fundamental, perhaps necessary changes.
Like what?
Because in his mind, like let's say he needed to, he didn't like something with the offense coordinator. He didn't like the play calling. He didn't like, or Rod Marinelli. There were some things that happened with him. I'm thinking Jerry will go status quo, and I don't know if he will be as likely to address some of the things that killed this team, which is they were 2 players away from the whole thing falling apart. I guess I could say 3 players. Tyron Smith went out, and they had one of the most embarrassing games I can ever remember. Zeke went out, and I guess they were very, very fortunate to go 3-3. Sean Lee, every time he went out, they just lost. They just went to pieces without Sean Lee. So I'm just wondering if they go 10-6 and don't make the playoffs, is Jerry going to address the things he needs to address?
Well, I would say that it was an indictment of the coaching staff and Jason Garrett in particular as a former quarterback himself to allow what happened in that Atlanta game to transpire where Chaz Green was so obviously unable to meet the challenge that day and gave up 5 sacks before Garrett finally reacted and pulled him from the game. And, oh, by the way, a young third-round pick that we haven't seen since. So they obviously wrecked him, or their confidence in him has been destroyed to the point that they don't even want to put him on the field anymore, because when Tyron Smith went out last night, it was Byron Bell again for the second time coming in and taking his place. What happened as far as, you're without Tyron Smith, you're without Sean Lee, you're without Ezekiel Elliott, and you can't withstand that, which I think Elliott was the most significant of those players that they lost. That to me, like Steven suggested in the interview last week, that's on the football department. That's on the people who are, creating the roster in terms of, like he said, hey, if you're going to achieve what we want to achieve with the Cowboys, and that's obviously a Super Bowl, we've got to have enough depth on our team that we don't fall apart on defense when Sean Lee goes out, and we don't lose our ability to score points when Ezekiel Elliott, is not with us. So to me, one thing is a coaching issue, and the other thing was more of a front office, personnel department, general manager concern. I think if they get to 10-6 and played 6 games without Elliott, that's probably about all you can hope for. Now, is that going to be good enough? And can they really get to 10-6? Well, let's see. We look at their next opponent at home on Christmas Eve with Ezekiel Elliott back in the lineup as the Seattle Seahawks, which they aren't what they used to be. I mean, KJ Wright was out of the lineup. Cam Chancellor's, down for the season. Richard Sherman's down for the season. So that defense is not what it used to be. And for them to get blown out like they did, the worst loss of Pete Carroll's career, coming at home in one of the most ominous venues for an opposing team in football, for the Rams to just dominate that game like they did, I think that suggests good things for the Cowboys to win that game. And then you look at the Eagles. Well, they lost their starting quarterback. They don't have their left tackle. And yesterday, Eli Manning threw 3 touchdown passes, and they had almost 600 yards of offense in that game against the Eagles. So neither one of these games looks unwinnable to me for the Cowboys, because the Eagles will have nothing to play for in all likelihood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right. And let's say you get to 10-6. And I do want to say this. How badly when I'm overseas, which is not that often, but when it does happen, and I'm over here in Rome as we speak right now, and
you're riding a Vespa.
Little worried about how this call's going in terms of the length of it. But I do think I have taken care of all my international calling. I'm on some Wi-Fi. I've really done a lot of checking on this. And I miss my Vespa, by the way. That would be kind of fun. That was more in Florence. In Rome, In Rome, they love the little smart car. And I don't know, Ed, have you thought about getting one of those little tiny vehicles?
Only if I was going to put my golf bag in it and drive it around the course.
I think that would be
a glorified
good.
Golf cart.
I'll tell you, at D&M Leasing, Ed, I'm going to send you over there. And in fact, in addition to the razors I'm going to give you and Frito, the Harry's razors, I'm going to do something that for D&M, and I'm going to give you the Mosley special. In fact, I'm offering everybody.
I think I get the Mosley special every week.
They're extending the sale. Yeah, I stick it to you every week. No, but they don't. They take care of their people. Extending the sale through the end of the year, that means you still have some time to get a great deal on a new car for Christmas. More people than ever deciding to lease because they love the flexibility of being able to drive a new car every few years. That's what we do, Ed. Every few years, trade it in, get a brand new one. And before I ever worked with D&M Leasing, I was a huge customer for a lot of years, and everybody in my family shops and buys from D&M. The sale is the biggest savings offer in all of D&M's 35 years of business, with great deals on 2017 closeouts, the lower interest rates. You don't want to miss out. Call D&M Leasing today at any local area code and 35 lease. That's 35 LEASE, or visit dmautoleasing.com. It's any local area code and 35 lease, LEASE, or visit dmautoleasing.com. Call's free. Not calling will cost you thousands.
Ooh, Ed, I can't afford that.
No, you can't. No one can. Closing thoughts from you as the Cowboys prepare to play on Christmas Eve. And I don't know if you're going to make it out there or not on Christmas Eve, but I will just say this. I know you had a Westwood One game. Remind me where you went.
I did. I was at the up in downtown Detroit. I covered from a sideline perspective for Westwood One. I covered the Lions' enormous victory over the downtrodden Chicago Bears, and the Lions are one of the teams that remain ahead of the Cowboys for a potential playoff berth with the number 6 seed in the NFC. And obviously Matthew Stafford is playing at a really high level. He is from Highland Park. He's one of the predecessors of John Stephen Jones' son, the quarterback there now. Prolific playoff run, 20 touchdowns, 2 picks in getting the Scots, the defending state champions, back to the playoffs. There's your high school football wrap-up on the presented by D&M Auto Leasing. I do think that I don't think the Lions are nearly as good as the Cowboys, and so my closing thought and final take on this Cowboys team at this point on this historic day where they welcome back Ezekiel Elliott to the Star is, to me, this team demonstrated before Elliott left on his suspension that when they have him, they are one of the best teams in football, and I could easily see them getting to the Super Bowl. I don't know if they can win the Super Bowl, but I could see them getting there. And when they don't have him, they just cannot even compete with the good teams in the NFC. And he's that valuable to them, and for that reason, they've got to make sure that this never happens again before they decide whether they're giving Zeke Elliott a second contract. He's one of the great players in the NFL, in my opinion, a top 10 player. But he cannot, with his behavior in the offseason, and even some of that we may have seen during the season, he cannot put his team at risk like he has in this case. Because if they don't make the playoffs this year, I put this squarely on Ezekiel Elliott.
Although, if they do make the playoffs with him and get to 10-6 and somehow make a run and run the table, as Stephen told us, although he might have just been talking about the rest of the regular season. But it will be interesting to look back on this time in Cabo when he just got that body razor sharp. And the only
Cabo owes the Cowboys, doesn't Cabo owe the Cowboys one?
I think they do. I think they do. I read somebody.
Do we need to explain that?
No, all Cowboys fans know what Cabo means. They know what Cabo means. In fact, somebody has written recently, they're like the real story with Cabo. And I'm like, I just couldn't even bring myself to read it. I was like, what I don't want to read is anybody try to say, oh, Tony went over there to do some charity work or something. I don't want to read that story. I don't even know who wrote it. I just saw it said report the real story behind the original trip to Cabo. And I just thought, I don't want this one. I don't want to read about this. Although I really would like to not read any more about Jerry Richardson, old men behaving badly. Ooh, I mean, goodness gracious, a man who just out and then out of the blue, this was just said, "Hey, I'm going to sell the franchise now." So anyway, it's been a rough year for the NFL, Ed. And I thought though yesterday. I thought the whole Sunday night game was kind of fun, though. Ratings, they may already be out for all I know. Ratings have to be like beyond belief for that game. I would say
the rating for the Steelers Patriots game was enormous.
Yeah,
but
I'm
think
thinking
the
Cowboys
game compares. But that's neither here nor there.
Okay,
we watched it, and you went to great lengths to see it. And that's really all that matters to the Doomsday podcast.
That's right. And my Uber driver, by the way, here in Rome tonight, said, "Where are you from?" I said, "Dallas." He immediately goes, Tony Romo. And he did it in, a heavy accent. He was from Rome. And so anyway, it's you can understand. He also talked about the Dallas Mavericks. For some reason, he was a big Dallas Mavericks fan. But Ed, I'll be excited to get back over the holidays. We'll both be in the States. I don't know if we'll be in the same room, but we'll both be in the States for this. And our many thanks to Frito Nation Productions and everything he's been a part. Ed, anything else left that you'd like to convey? Why don't you tell everybody happy holidays, Merry Christmas, and Happy Hanukkah, all those things that you like to share with folks.
Should I put Kwanzaa in there? Okay, Happy
Love
Kwanzaa, Happy Hanukkah,
yes.
Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. And if I left anybody out, that's just who I am. So I'm not an inclusive person. I'm sorry. I apologize. But no, anyway,
right.
We thank all of our loyal listeners. Some more loyal than others. We thank all of those who review us critically or not. We thank Frito Nation. We thank all of our wonderful advertisers. And Mose, thanks to you. I've enjoyed doing this. Good night, Dallas.
Lights are shining, stockings have been hung. You're praying for your daughter, lighting candles for your son. They're living in the city now, you don't see them anymore.
It's one thing falling in love with a house, picturing yourself moving in and calling it home, and quite another navigating the world of price negotiating, mortgage lenders, and finding the budget that works best for you. An agent who's a Realtor can make understanding that world easier. Realtors have the expertise, access to proprietary data, and tools to help you get from imagining living somewhere to actually doing it. That's the kind of help we can provide. Because that's who we are. Realtors are members of the National Association of Realtors.
You haven't heard about the McCrispy yet? Well, then, you probably haven't heard the sweet silence after the first crispy bite either. Go try it for yourself to hear the best nut sound you've ever heard.